But there was one more surprise I hadn't seen coming. One evening, he took me back to the place where it all began. The quiet courtroom where we had signed our deal 6 months ago. Except this time, the room was filled with candles and flowers, soft music playing in the background, and only two chairs, one for him, one for me. He knelt before me, holding a velvet box with trembling hands. Inside was a new ring, rose gold, delicate, and carved with the words "Forever isn't long enough." "I married you once to protect myself," he whispered, "but now I want to marry you for everything you are, for your strength, your madness, your kindness, and for all the moments we haven't lived yet. Will you choose me again, Zoya? This time, not because you have to, but because you want to." Tears fell freely as I nodded, unable to speak. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and in that moment I realized sometimes the best love stories don't start with fairy tales. Sometimes they begin with heartbreak and grow from truth. And what we had now wasn't a deal. It was a destiny we chose, together. The second time I walked down the aisle, there were no contracts, no fine print, no cameras or media glare, just a soft breeze, a white garden blooming with jasmine, and the man who once refused to believe in love, waiting at the end of it. Arav looked at me like I was the sunrise after a lifetime of darkness. His eyes held no doubt, no hesitation, only wonder, as if every scar I carried, every breath I took, was something sacred to him. And when I reached him, he took my hands and whispered, "You saved me long before I ever tried to save you." We didn't recite traditional vows, we spoke from the pieces of our hearts that had learned how to bleed and still beat again. "I married you once out of duty," I said, my voice trembling, "but I stayed because I fell in love with the way you broke, quietly, privately, and still rose to hold me together. I choose you again and again and again, even if time stops." He smiled through wet lashes and whispered back, "I thought I needed someone perfect, but what I really needed was someone real, someone like you." And as the sun set behind us, we kissed soft and slow, as if the world could wait. That night, wrapped in candlelight and laughter, we sat beside each other, hand in hand, writing letters not for lawyers or contracts, but for our future. To the children we hadn't met yet. To the versions of ourselves we had survived to become. To love how it found us, broke us, healed us. I looked at him and whispered, "Do you still wonder if love is worth the risk?" He smiled, brushing his thumb against my lips. "With you, it was never a risk. It was the safest decision I ever made." And as we watched the stars that night, wrapped in warmth and silence, I realized something I would carry forever. Our marriage had once been just a deal, but the night he discovered my secret was the night he gave me something far more powerful than a cure. He gave me a reason to live. And I gave him a love he never saw coming. The kind that doesn't end, even when the contract does. They say some people walk into your life like a whisper, but change everything like a storm. I never expected that a single signature on a piece of paper would alter the course of my destiny. But when I stood there, clutching that pen with trembling fingers and 1,000 unshed tears buried behind a practiced smile, I didn't sign a deal. I signed away my freedom, my future, maybe even my heart. I was just 24 and already tired of the kind of pain that makes you grow old before your time. Life had been unkind, especially to my little brother Aman. His rare illness drained whatever savings we had left. So when the offer came, cold, clinical, and conditional, I took it. 6 months of marriage, no strings, no expectations, and no intimacy. Just play the perfect wife. The reward? Enough money to save Aman's life. Enough to finally breathe. I met him on a rainy evening. Arav Raichand, the man who was supposed to be my husband. Tall, aloof, and heartbreakingly handsome. His eyes were sharp as broken glass, and his words? Sharper. He didn't want love. He didn't even want a wife. Just an actress in a red carpet fantasy to secure a multi-billion-dollar inheritance. And me? I didn't want anything except time. Time to hide what he could never know. Time to leave before the truth caught up with me. Because I was running out of it, and he could never find out why. But fate doesn't care about deals. Or secrets. Especially the kind that burn at midnight and whisper through trembling lips when hearts begin to feel too much. That night, when he discovered what I was hiding, everything changed. And nothing was pretend anymore. The wedding was quiet, sterile, and suffocating. No flowers. No music. Just two signatures, a cold courtroom, and a diamond ring that felt heavier than chains. Arav didn't even look at me as he slid the ring onto my finger. His jaw was set, eyes fixed on the notary as if I didn't exist. I was a formality to him, a name on a contract, a necessary inconvenience. And I had promised myself I'd never expect more. His mansion was everything mine was not: glass, gold, and silence. The kind that echoed. The kind that reminded you just how alone you really were. He assigned me a room at the far end of the corridor, far from his. No visitors, no family, no questions. Just roles to play. But the first time I caught him watching me, it wasn't anger in his eyes. It was confusion. Like I didn't fit into the cold blueprint of his perfectly calculated world. I offered him tea one morning and he stared at the cup like it was an alien object. I smiled softly. "You don't have to drink it. I just thought, maybe you'd like something warm." He didn't respond, just walked away. But the next morning, the empty cup sat neatly on the tray outside my door. It wasn't much, but it was something. We appeared together in public like two well-dressed strangers. Cameras flashed, people whispered. And Arav's hand always stayed lightly at the small of my back, never possessive, never tender. Just calculated control. But I was watching him too. Behind the arrogance, I saw glimpses of a man who didn't sleep much. A man who sat alone in his office late into the night, holding a photo frame he thought no one saw. A man who kept one room in the mansion locked, and every time I passed it, I felt the air shift. Heavy, haunted. I was keeping secrets, but so was he. We didn't speak much, but the silence between us, it started changing. It became something fragile, electric. I would catch him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. And sometimes I'd linger in the hallway, listening to the faint sound of his piano at midnight. A melody both aching and beautiful. Just like him, I had promised myself I wouldn't feel anything. That I would finish the 6 months, take the money and disappear before my secret caught up with me. But every time he looked at me like he was trying to figure out what I was made of, I forgot how to breathe. It was a Saturday afternoon when everything shifted. We were attending yet another charity gala. Arav, in a crisp black tuxedo, looked like a man carved from stone. Sharp lines, unreadable expression, perfectly rehearsed charm. I wore a silver gown, borrowed from a designer I'd never afford on my own. It shimmered under the chandeliers, but all I felt was the weight of my secret pressing against my ribs like a buried scream. The cameras were ruthless. "Smile," he muttered under his breath, as we walked the red carpet. I did, because I had to. Because my brother's life was stitched into every second I kept up this lie. But that night, something broke the routine. Arav's ex-fiancée, Kiara Malhotra, appeared like an ice storm in silk. She sauntered over, her voice a poison-laced whisper. "Still playing house with your contract bride, Arav." She laughed, glancing at me with disdain. "She looks like she came from the servants' quarters." Before I could retreat, Arav stepped forward, his hand suddenly tightening around mine. "Careful, Kiara," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You're standing too close to my wife." Wife. That word had never sounded like a shield before. My heart stuttered. He didn't let go of my hand for the rest of the night. Back home, I expected him to pull away, to pretend it hadn't happened. But instead he followed me to the balcony, where I stood under the moonlight, trying to steady the chaos inside me. "You should be sleeping," he said softly. A different tone, not commanding. Curious, I smiled faintly. "You too." Silence stretched. He leaned against the railing beside me. "Why did you agree to this?" he asked, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I looked at the stars instead of him. "Because sometimes people don't get choices, just survival." He turned his head, studying me like I was something he'd never seen before. "You don't look like someone who gave up." I didn't respond. If only he knew how close I was to breaking. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of the way his voice echoed in my mind. And because for the first time, I wished the deal had been real. The next few days unfolded like a slow unraveling. Something unspoken had shifted between us. The way he glanced at me across the dining table, the way his fingers brushed mine a second longer than necessary as he passed the salt. He didn't say much, but I could feel it. His silence wasn't cold anymore. It was searching. One evening I found him playing the piano again, but this time he didn't stop when he noticed me. He just continued, letting the melody wrap around the room like a memory too tender to speak. When the final note faded, he said, "That piece. My mother used to play it when she couldn't sleep." There was something raw in his voice. I sat beside him, leaving enough distance between us to respect the space he always guarded. "You loved her." He gave a dry laugh, eyes distant. "She loved too hard. My father didn't deserve it. He left. She never recovered." I wanted to touch his hand. I didn't. I just whispered, "She would have been proud of the way you fight to stay standing." He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Later that night, I was in the kitchen making tea when he appeared out of nowhere. "Do you always stay up this late?" he asked. I nodded. "Old habit. Hospitals have strange hours." He tilted his head. "You worked in a hospital?" I froze. My heart lurched. "Something like that," I said, looking away quickly, praying he wouldn't ask more. I couldn't let him see through me. Not yet. He didn't press. Instead, he reached for the second cup I had just poured. "For me." I looked at him in surprise. "I didn't think you'd want one." "I didn't. Until tonight." We stood in silence, sipping tea in a kitchen far too big for two people, yet filled with something intimate. Something dangerous. Because every time he got closer, every time I felt his eyes linger a second too long, I wanted to believe in something we never promised each other. But how could I? When every beat of my heart was on borrowed time. I walked away before I did something foolish. Before I told him everything. Before I let him kiss me. Because I knew, if he ever found out the truth, it would destroy whatever this fragile, beautiful illusion between us was becoming. Days passed like stolen moments, stitched together by silent glances and almost words. Our arrangement hadn't changed on paper, but something inside both of us had. The tension was no longer about pretense, it was about restraint, and it was slipping. One rainy evening, Arav arrived home earlier than usual. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, hair slightly damp, and he looked undone. Like the world had finally cracked a piece of his armor. I stood at the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, and I didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "You hate the rain?" he asked. I turned, startled. "No. I used to love it, when I was younger." "What changed?" I didn't answer right away. "Rain reminds me of everything I lost, everything I still might lose." He didn't question it. Just stepped beside me, and watched in silence. For a man who rarely said much, his presence always spoke louder than words. Then, without warning, he reached out and gently tucked a wet strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered near my cheek. My breath caught. "Zoya," he said, and it was the first time he said my name like it meant something. I looked up, eyes locked with his. "Yes?" He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he leaned in slowly, hesitating for a breath, like giving me time to stop him. I didn't. Maybe I couldn't. His lips met mine in a kiss that wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't part of the deal. It was real. It was slow, deliberate, full of unspoken pain and desire. It didn't demand. It confessed. When we finally pulled apart, I stood there trembling, heart thundering in my chest. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered, almost to himself. But I said nothing. Because I was afraid if I spoke, he'd see the truth in my voice. That I'd already fallen. That the lie I was living had turned into the only reality I craved. And worst of all, that kiss had made everything harder. Because the closer he got to me, the more dangerous the secret I was carrying became. I walked away again that night, but this time I wasn't walking away from him. I was walking away from the part of me that wanted to tell him everything. The days that followed felt like borrowed time, precious, fleeting and cruel. We spoke more, laughed softly in passing, even sat together in silence that didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt safe, as if we were slowly building something fragile neither of us knew how to name. But I kept my secret close, locked inside a small drawer, buried beneath old journals and hospital files, was everything I had kept hidden. My diagnosis, my prognosis, my slow countdown. The truth that this body, this heart, was a ticking clock. I had 3 months left, maybe less, and every moment with him felt like a cruel blessing. Then came the night of the masquerade gala, a dazzling event, filled with champagne, whispers and masks. I wore a dark green gown, velvet and backless, and a mask lined with tiny golden feathers. But the irony wasn't lost on me. I had been wearing a different kind of mask, long before this night. Arav looked like something out of a fairy tale: dark suit, silver mask, quiet intensity. He found me in the crowd without hesitation, offering his hand with a subtle bow. "Dance with me," I hesitated. "You don't dance." "I never had the right partner," he said, and there was something in his voice that made my heart flutter with both fear and hope. We danced under crystal chandeliers, the world around us a blur of shadows and music. His hand was firm on my waist, and our steps matched like we had done this forever. Then he leaned in, whispering, "What are you hiding, Zoya?" My breath caught. "What do you mean? You look at me like you want to tell me something, but you never do." I smiled, masking the ache in my chest. "Maybe I like the mystery." His eyes searched mine through the mask. "No, you wear mystery like armor, and I can't decide if I want to protect you or take it all off." The music stopped, the lights dimmed, and for a second it felt like time stood still. I slipped away before he could ask more. I ran, not from him, but from the truth that I was no longer sure I could protect him from. Because that night, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. He was falling for me, and I was falling for him. But love, in my world, had an expiration date, and it was coming faster than I could bear. The silence after that night felt different. It wasn't cold anymore. It was waiting, breathing, as if even the walls of the mansion knew something had changed between us. Arav didn't confront me. He didn't push, but he watched. Not with suspicion, but with care. As if he was trying to read the language I spoke only through my eyes. I spent most of my time in the garden after that, watering flowers that never bloomed the way I hoped, watching the sunlight shift across the marble tiles. I was trying to freeze time, hold on to each second before it was stolen from me. And then, one evening, he did something I never expected. He came into the garden, holding a small plate. "You missed dinner," he said. I looked up, startled. "I wasn't hungry." "Eat anyway," he said quietly. "Not because you need to. Because I need you to." It wasn't a command. It was a confession, wrapped in simplicity. I took the plate with trembling hands, and sat beside him under the stars. We didn't talk about us. We talked about books, and movies, and the kind of music we used to listen to before life turned serious. He told me about his childhood home, about a dog he once had named Pluto, about how he hated birthdays because after his mother died, they just felt like reminders of time lost. And I almost told him the truth, that my heart wasn't just breaking for him, it was physically giving up. That every laugh I shared with him came at the cost of a pain I hid behind painkillers and practiced smiles. But instead, I just listened. Because some part of me didn't want to shatter the world we were building. Not yet. Later that night, I opened the drawer I kept locked. The files were still there. My medical reports. The letters I'd written to Aman for when I was gone. I touched the edges, willing myself to stay strong. But when I closed the drawer again, I didn't realize I hadn't locked it properly. And I never imagined Arav would be the one to find it first. I should have known something was wrong the next morning. Arav wasn't at the breakfast table. The staff avoided my eyes. The silence that once felt comforting now pressed down on me like a storm waiting to break. When I returned to my room, the drawer was ajar. My breath caught. No. Panic surged as I flung it open. The reports, they had been touched. My letters, the prescriptions, the diagnosis, all of it. The secret I had buried for months, exposed in a single moment of carelessness. And that's when I saw it, an envelope on the bed. My name written in his handwriting. Inside, only one line. "Why didn't you tell me you were dying?" I couldn't breathe. My legs gave way beneath me as I sank to the floor, the letter crumpling in my fist. The door burst open a moment later, and there he was. Arav, eyes blazing, pain etched into every line of his face. "Was any of it real?" he asked, voice raw, trembling. I couldn't look at him. It wasn't supposed to be real, I whispered. None of this was supposed to happen, but it did. He shouted, stepping closer. You think you could just walk away? Disappear without a word? Leave me with a fake ring and real grief? Tears burned down my cheeks. That's why I couldn't tell you, Arav. Because you, are the only thing that's ever felt real in my entire life. And I didn't want to watch you break, when you what? He interrupted, voice cracking. When you leave me. I nodded, unable to speak through the sob in my throat. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at me like I was both the miracle and the betrayal he never expected. And then, slowly he walked out. The door closed behind him, softer than I thought it would be, but the sound of it felt like the end of everything. After that day, the mansion felt colder than ever. Arav didn't return that night, or the next. His absence screamed louder than his presence ever had. And I moved like a shadow, drifting through halls I no longer belonged to. I stopped eating. I stopped hoping. The pain in my chest wasn't just from my failing heart anymore. It was from a love I had tried so hard not to feel, and failed. I packed my things in silence. The contract was meaningless now. The money meant nothing. I left behind the ring, neatly placed on the piano, where his fingers once created magic. I didn't leave a letter. What could I say that my eyes hadn't already screamed the night he found the truth? I returned to the tiny one-bedroom flat I used to call home. Aman was staying with a neighbor for the weekend. He never knew the truth of where I had gone, or why. All he knew was that his sister left for 6 months, and came back thinner, quieter, and with eyes that looked like they'd stopped dreaming. The days blurred. I started treatment again, but my body was tired. The doctor didn't say much, but I could see it in his eyes. He was preparing me for the worst. And yet I kept holding on. Not for me, but for the man who had kissed me like the world was ending. For the man who walked away, because I didn't give him the chance to choose me, even broken, even fading. Then one evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, expecting a neighbor, but it was him, Arav. He looked exhausted, haunted. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, but they held the same fire I'd fallen in love with. And something more. Pain. He didn't speak right away, just stared at me, as if trying to memorize me in case I vanished. You should have told me, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was trying to protect you, I murmured. No, he said, stepping closer. You were protecting yourself, from letting anyone in, from being loved when you thought you didn't deserve it. Tears welled in my eyes. You don't understand. I do, he interrupted, his voice fierce now. I understand exactly how it feels to lose someone you love. But I never thought I'd lose you before I had the chance to say it. Say what? I asked, my voice shaking. He took my hands, pressed them to his chest, and said the one thing I was never prepared to hear. That I love you, Zoya. No contracts, no conditions, just love. I stood frozen, his words echoing in the quiet room like a confession the universe had waited too long to deliver. My heart, fragile, tired, scared, beat louder than ever before. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I had braced myself for silence. Not this. Arav, I whispered, eyes stinging. You don't have to say that just because you're what? He cut in gently, brushing a tear from my cheek. Sick, dying. He stepped closer, voice breaking. Don't you dare reduce yourself to that. You are not your illness, Zoya. You are the woman who brought light into my cold world, who made me believe in something again. You don't get to decide I wouldn't choose you, because I already did. I sobbed as he pulled me into his arms, holding me like I was something precious, something irreplaceable. And for the first time in months, I let go. I let myself cry into his chest, let myself feel the warmth of being wanted, even if only for a little while longer. He stayed with me that night. Not just in my home, but in my silence. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer false hope. He simply stayed, his fingers intertwined with mine, as we sat on the couch until morning. The next day he returned with paperwork, not for a divorce, but for something else entirely. He had spoken to doctors, specialists, found a rare treatment trial overseas, experimental, risky, but possible. He didn't ask me to hope. He only asked me to let him fight for me. I have money, Zoya, he said, eyes filled with desperate determination. Let me use it for something that matters. For you. I hesitated, terrified of disappointment, of false promises. But then he knelt before me, not to beg, but to propose again. This time, not for a deal, not for a company, just for us. For whatever life we have left. Tears rolled down my cheeks, as I whispered, yes. Not because I believed in miracles, but because I believed in him. We left the country 2 days later. Arav had arranged everything: private jet, treatment facility, the best specialists in Switzerland. I sat beside him, quiet, still overwhelmed by how quickly everything had changed. How a marriage built on conditions had transformed into something real, something rare. During the flight, he held my hand the entire time. Not once did he look at his phone or answer business calls. He was just there. Fully, completely present, as if nothing mattered more than the girl beside him who had once tried so hard to disappear. The clinic was nestled between snowy mountains, serene and isolated. They began treatment immediately: blood work, medications, monitoring. The doctors were honest. My heart was weak, and the trial wasn't guaranteed to work. But there was a small chance, a flicker of hope, and sometimes that's all it takes. Arav rented a cottage nearby, and every morning he walked me to the hospital, like it was the most sacred part of his day. He brought me books. He cooked me breakfast, badly, but he tried. He read to me when I couldn't keep my eyes open, and at night, when I cried in fear of the unknown, he kissed my forehead and whispered, "You're not going anywhere, not without me." It was the first time in my life I allowed myself to imagine a future, a real one. Then, weeks later, something changed. The doctors called us in and sat us down with measured smiles. My body was responding. My numbers were improving. It wasn't a cure, but it was a beginning. A chance. I cried into my palms, and Arav pulled me into his arms, holding me like he had been holding his breath all along. "You're going to live," he whispered, his voice shaking. "We're going to live." That night, he took me outside into the snowy silence beneath 1,000 stars, and under the moonlight, he slid a second ring onto my finger. "This one chosen with love, not obligation. No contracts," he murmured, eyes glistening. "Only promises." And I whispered back, "Only love." We returned home a month later, not as strangers bound by paperwork, but as something far more fragile and powerful. Partners, lovers, hopeful survivors of something neither of us could explain, but both of us had fought for. The mansion felt different this time. It wasn't cold or echoing. It felt lived in, warmer. There were fresh lilies in the hallway, my favorite. A painting of the Swiss mountains hung in the entryway. He had made space for us, in both his home and his life. And in the soft light of our bedroom, he made love to me for the first time, not as a duty or a consequence of a contract, but as a man who cherished every heartbeat against his. It was gentle, patient, and impossibly emotional. He kissed my scars like they were sacred, touched me like I was fragile and powerful all at once. And in his arms, I didn't feel sick or afraid. I felt alive. I fell asleep that night, with his heartbeat beneath my cheek, steady and strong, as if it had always been meant to carry mine. But fate, I had learned, never forgets. A few weeks later, while organizing my closet, I found the old envelope, the original contract of our arranged marriage. I stared at it, my hands trembling. That paper had once been the reason I said yes. Now it was a ghost of a life I no longer belonged to. I almost threw it away. But something made me keep it, folded, hidden away, a reminder of how far we had come, of what we had survived. Then one rainy evening, as we sat by the window with tea and silence, Arav turned to me and asked, "Do you regret any of it?" I smiled softly, wrapping my fingers around his. "No, even the deal, because it brought me you." He kissed my hand, lingering. "I regret only one thing." I looked at him, heart thudding. "What?" "That I waited so long to fall in love with you." My eyes welled again, not from sadness, but from the quiet peace that comes when love is no longer a dream, but your reality. That night, we danced in the rain, no cameras, no obligations, just skin and laughter, and 1,000 unspoken promises. Because what started as a transaction had become the kind of love that no contract could ever define. Spring arrived slowly, like our healing, one warm breeze at a time. The garden I had once sat in alone was now blooming, not just with flowers, but with memory. Arav and I spent evenings planting seeds, laughing at our failures, arguing over which colors belonged where. We built something together, not just a home, but a life. Every morning, I woke up to his hand in mine, his voice greeting me before the sun did. He started humming when he made coffee. He read to me in bed. He brought a man home, gave him the life I had only dreamed of for him, a school, a smile, a room of his own. My little brother adored him. Sometimes I'd catch Arav watching me, his gaze soft and distant, like he still couldn't believe I was real. And sometimes I'd feel the same way about him. How did a man who never believed in love fall so completely, so selflessly? But the past has a strange way of knocking when you least expect it. One evening, I was in the study looking for a book when I opened a drawer in his desk I'd never touched before. Inside was the old photograph he used to hold late at night, his mother, smiling, young, beautiful. Next to it, a journal. His journal. I didn't mean to read it, but a page had fallen open. It was dated the week he found out my secret. She's dying, and yet all I can think about is how to save her. What kind of man does that make me? Desperate? Weak? Or finally, human? I never believed in miracles. Until Zoya. My heart shattered, because even when he was hurt, even when he could have turned away, he chose to love me through the pain. That night, I climbed into his lap, without a word, curling into him like I had found my place in the world. He didn't ask why. He just held me tighter, as if he knew I'd found another piece of him I hadn't seen before. And in that stillness, I realized we weren't just in love, we were each other's survival. Summer brought with it the kind of golden peace I had never known. My heart, once fragile and failing, had begun to fight for me, for us. The treatments, the care, the quiet love that surrounded me every day, they worked. Slowly, steadily, my health began to rise from the ashes of what I thought was inevitable. Even my doctors were stunned. "You're one of the lucky few," they said. But I knew luck had nothing to do with it. It was love. Fierce, relentless love. The kind that rewrote endings and redefined hope. Arav and I started talking about things we once thought were out of reach. Travels, dreams, children. I would catch him sketching names in the corner of his notebook, pretending he was only doodling. I never said anything. I just smiled and stored every one of those moments deep inside my heart.